Welcome back, friends. It's the first week with the new Dataslate with all the new updated rules and points, and we got all the tournament results here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Just a quick reminder before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe so you can get my latest videos and really help support me and support the channel. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Also, one more thing to note, only about half the tournaments or less than half the tournaments use the new Dataslate and the rules and points. I kind of combined all these week's results with the old Dataslate, so it's kind of mixed in. So I'll have the last 12 weeks of data to go through. And moving forward, we'll move on to the new Dataslate and everything will be from this next week going forward. Another note, I'm going on vacation, so you won't see any new videos for the next couple weeks, but when I get back in early April, we'll have 2 or 3 weeks of data to go through, so we'll have lots of information to cover then. All right, let's get started. First thing we're going to go through is the number of players for the previous week. So last week we had 817 players, and for the data slate, we're just over 8,800. Number of games played was just under 4,000, and we're just about 46,000 for the data slate. And we had 17 tournaments last week, bringing the total up to 157 for the data slate. All right, and the first chart we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So just a quick reminder, the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything within that range is in green. Anything slightly above and below is in orange, and anything way above or way below is in red. First thing we're going to look at here at the top is we had Knights come in with 63% at number 1. Number 2 is Aeldari with 56%, Chaos Knights at 55%, Black Templars at 53%, and Blood Angels at 52%. Down at the bottom, we have Drukhari at 38%, Sisters at 40%, Tau at 40%, World Eaters at 41%, Tyranids at 42%. So Imperial Knights had a really good week, 63%. Now, like I said, this week is kind of a mix between the old and the new rules. So you don't really know, it's hard to say which ones are which, but they did definitely impress in the sort of shoulder week, we'll call it, before the new rules gets pushed into all the tournaments. Although not surprising, they had a 56% win rate. They did get nerfed in the last data slate, but again, about half these tournaments didn't use the data slate, so it's hard to tell exactly where those wins came from, but they did do very good overall, and I expect to see them doing pretty well moving forward. They're still a very good codex after the nerfs. Chaos Knights, another really good result from them as well, 55%. And Black Templars had 53%. It's been another good week for them. They've been down to bottom for a while. They might get hit by the nerfs where they made the changes to Oath, so we might not see them back up at the top because they didn't get too many changes army-wide. So this could just be a specific case in the last couple of weeks where Blood Angels and Black Templars figured out a way to sort of get those bonuses without actually running Space Marines, but that's been fixed moving forward, so we'll see how that shakes out. And down at the bottom, Drukhari, really rough week, 38%, Sisters 40%, and I know Sisters got a lot of changes, but again, only half the tournaments use the new rules, so I would expect to see that number starting to go up quite a bit moving forward once everyone gets to use their Miracle Dice again. And Tau had a rough week, and so did Tyranids actually at 42%. Those guys are usually up around the middle, so I'll have to see if that was just an odd week overall or if there's something there moving forward. So next up is the army representation. So this is the amount of players playing each army. So the average is 3.7%. If everything was perfectly balanced, everyone would be at 3.7%. So at the top, we had Aeldari with 9.4%, then Orks at 6.9%, Necrons 6.9%, Space Marines 6%, Astra Munitorum 5.9%. Now at the bottom, you have Black Templars at 0.7%, Thousand Suns at 1.1%, Space Wolves 1.5%, Drukhari 1.6%, and Deathwatch 1.7%. So Aeldari still really popular even after the nerfs. So we'll see how that shapes up going forward. If the army takes a little bit of a hit power-wise, we could see those numbers drop because they're very high, almost 3 times the average representation. Black Templars had a really low rep week, but also had very good results. So I don't know if that had to do with that little trick they had to get the extra buffs that they really shouldn't have had. So we'll see moving forward if the win percentage maintains. I have a feeling the rep's going to kind of maintain because they didn't really get any positive changes to sort of bring everyone back to the army. Lots of armies under 2% this week, which isn't surprising. It's been kind of that way this whole data slate, kind of a case of have and have nots when it comes to army representation. And there was no Imperial Agent players this week, so if you see them missing off the charts, that's why. Next up is the combined stats chart. So this includes win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. Just a quick reminder, XOX1 is the percentage of players for each army who only lost 1 game or lost no games at a tournament. So this is kind of a stat just to show how often players are finding success at a tournament. They might not be getting to the finals or winning a tournament, but they're going 4-1 or 5-0. So they're doing very well. So the higher that number, the more general success that army has. So I have this chart sorted by highest stat combined at the top all the way to the lowest stat combined at the bottom. So Imperial Knights, they had a crazy good week, 63% win rate. Obviously, it's very, very high. Their XOX1 was 37%, so over a third of every Knight player that went to the table was going 1 loss or no losses, and had a 3.5% rep, which is average, so really good results there. Chaos Knights, they kept pretty close with their Imperial cousins there, except the only really difference was the win rate and a little bit on the representation. Then you had Aeldari, another really good week, 56% and 30% XOX1 with a 9% rep. So they kind of made up the difference between Chaos Knights there by having the extra representation. And then Deathwatch, 50% win rate, but they had a 35% XOX1. So they had the second highest, or third highest, sorry, XOX1, but only a 1.7% rep. So that kept them from being in the top 3. Down at the bottom, Tau had a really rough week there. They had a 40% win rate with a 10% XOX1. They had a 3.4% rep overall. So they had a good amount of players, just weren't finding any success and kind of just living at the bottom. Same as Tyranids. They actually had a 6.7% XOX1 despite their 5.5% rep. I mean, they're always a popular army, but it's really surprising to see them struggle that much across the board, only pulling in, less than 10% of the people doing well at the tournament. So, I mean, Tyranids were just basically mid boards or low boards all weekend, which is kind of surprising because they've been doing pretty well this whole data slate. And then you had Drukhari and Grey Knights both struggling as well. Drukhari did have a good XOX1 percentage, 15. That's around the average, but they just struggle with the win rate. So it looks like 1 or 2 players did really well, and then everyone else did very poorly with Drukhari. All right, is there anything else to note here? Yes, Space Marines. They had a 43% win rate and a 14% XOX1 with a 6% rep. So they were kind of on average with what they have been. Their reps down a little bit, but their win percentage really dropped this week. So I don't know what was 100% up with their win rate drop. They've been usually around like 46, 47, 48%. So something to watch there. Could just be an odd week, as we did see a lot of armies who were normally doing fairly well down at the bottom, like Tau, Tyranids, Space Marines, and Custodes even only had 46% this week. Overall, kind of a surprising top of the charts here. We have Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights both doing really well. And then you had Deathwatch also up there. And then you had Thousand Suns up there as well. 49% win rate, but had a 33% XOX1. They were also held back by their army rep with only 1.1%. So, there's an army that did very well overall this weekend. Not many players, but all those players who went to tournaments had a lot of success, it looks like. Now we're going to move on to the tournament wins for each army last week. So looking at, we have Orks with 4, Deathwatch with 3, Imperial Knights and Munitorum with 2, Space Marines, Votan, Chaos Knights, Black Templars, Adeptus Custodes, and Adeptus Mechanicus all got 1. Orks, big week, they had 4 wins. They did get their new Dakka detachment, so that did play into it a little bit. Deathwatch pulled out 3. They've been winning here and there, not too often, but it's kind of surprising to see them pull out 3 big wins this week. And Adeptus Mechanicus finally got their first win of the data slate, just under the wire, leaving only Sister Spell is the only army with no wins this data slate. So next up, we have tournament wins for each subfaction. So it just takes the armies who got all their wins and breaks it down to the subfactions so you can kind of see where everything picked up their wins. So Orks, I got all 4 of their wins across 4 different detachments, which is nice because that just shows a little diversity within the army, which is what you want to see. Combined Regiment got both their wins for Militarum. So the Bridgehead Brigade, which was doing most of the heavy lifting, is nowhere to be seen here. Not surprising after some of the changes. And the Skitarii Hunters pulled out the first win for AdMech, which was good to see because they've been struggling this whole data slate, so it's nice that they finally pulled out a win. Moving on, this is the win percentage by army for the current data slate. So this goes back to December 16th. And looking here, we can see at the top here, we can see the Chaos Demons had a 53.4% win rate for the data slate. Then you have Deathwatch and Psychic with 52.6, Imperial Knights with 52, Necrons with 51.3, and then Custodes at 50.4. And at the bottom, you had Templars with 41.8, Sisters with 42.2, AdMech with 43, World Eaters with 45, and Dark Angels with 46. With their impressive wins this week, Knights kind of crept into the 3rd spot, overtaking Necrons, giving a interesting top 3 that we haven't seen in quite a while, I would assume, with Chaos Demons, Deathwatch, and Imperial Knights being the top 3 factions this data slate. Another thing to note is majority of the factions do fall within the 47 to 50% win rate, which is right where you want to be. That's about average. The average is around 48, 49 when you take into account draws. And then down at the bottom, Black Templars, they did have a good week, so it did pull their average up a little bit. They were teetering right around the 40%, but still struggled overall, same as Sisters, both of them down around 42%. And AdMech also struggled with 43%. I mean, they're not surprising. They were the armies that were the last ones to win any tournaments and generally were perceived as the weakest ones this edition. And were generally perceived as the weakest ones this data slate. Now, Sisters did get a buff, allowing their Miracle Dice to come back, which I think will improve their numbers moving forward. But AdMech and Black Templars didn't really get much, much to the disappointment of the communities. So I have a feeling we'll be seeing them at the bottom again as the charts roll out in the coming weeks. Okay, and next up we have Army representation for the data slate. So again, the average is 3.7. And looking at the chart here, you can see that Space Marines came out on top for the data slate with a 7.7%, Necrons at 6.5, Aeldari 6.1, Militarum 5.9, and Custodes at 5.6. And now at the bottom, you had Agents at 0.2, Deathwatch at 1.4, Sisters 1.5, Black Templars 1.5, and Drukhari 1.7, tied with Thousand Suns. Space Marines had almost double the meta average, which was mostly held up from early in the data slate when everyone was running Space Marines with the new Oath ability. They were running up about 8 or 9% every week. It has dipped down a little bit since the Aeldari Codex came out. There's been a lot more Aeldari players, and that crept them into the number 3 spot. They were down around 5% normally. And Necrons, as always, they're always a very popular army, and they're very good with their Star Shatterer. They did a lot of work early on in the data slate as well, so that kept them up at about 6.5. And then you have 6 to 7 armies that are a sub 2%. Those are the ones that are really struggling. They're like half of the average. So you definitely want to see some love to these armies. But, you know, you look at Sisters, I have a feeling they're going to bounce back a little bit because they got some changes. But then you have like Agents, you're never going to see a lot of players, so you just got to scratch that one off. Same as Deathwatch, it's just one detachment. So again, you're not going to see a lot of players. Drukhari is always a very low played army unless they're doing extremely well, then they might get up close to the average, but they're generally around 2%. They could be a little bit higher. Definitely could have used some love, but it is what it is. I think they're going to stay down there. So I think you're still going to see Templars, Deathwatch, Agents, Drukhari, and probably Space Wolves and Thousand Suns. They might creep up a little bit, but not too much, I don't think. And AdMech, they're always pretty popular, right around 2 to 3%. That's pretty good for a specific niche army like them. So I wouldn't expect to see them jump too much, especially seeing how they didn't get any changes in the last data slate. Overall, this was kind of a data slate of have and have-nots, and there's doing most of the heavy work with over 5% rep, and then there's 5 to 6 armies at the bottom who are barely showing up to tournaments at all. So you would hope with the last data slate that dropped, changes would have been made to those armies at the bottom and kind of get some more representation pushed in and kind of balance out this chart, but it's not really what we saw happen. So I have a feeling it's going to continue kind of looking like this moving forward until some more changes come at the next data slate, which will be more of a rules change, I think. All right, and we have the combined win rate XOX1 representation for the entire data slate. So the top 5 were Demons, Aeldari, Imperial Agents, Necrons, and Knights. And the bottom 5 were Black Templars, Sisters, AdMech, and World Eaters and Votann. So Aeldari, they made a late surge. They almost kind of crept into the first spot, overtaking Demons, and Demons has been absurdly broken this data slate. They've been definitely the most powerful army, mostly just because of Legion of Excess. But Aeldari crept up there. Their win percentage was just below Demons, which kind of kept them out of it because they had a slightly better XOX1 and better rep. Agents, there's so few players. They might have had like 20 to 30 players total. So, you know, not much to take from it. It's hard to really get a lot of good information from it. 28% XOX1. So the players who are bringing them are having success, but I think it's just so niche and so specific that you're never going to see them be a widespread army. And same as Necrons, they're always a popular army. They always perform really well. Not surprising they're up there. Down at the bottom, again, it kind of just reflects all the other things. Black Templar, Sisters, and AdMech kind of all sitting around the same, with Black Templars kind of struggling the most. They're one of the 2 armies that have the sub 10% XOX1 with World Eaters, which World Eaters actually in last place for XOX1, which is kind of surprising. They're definitely an army that didn't get quite the attention I think that they deserve from the community. They were struggling pretty mightily, but they just weren't struggling as much as Sisters and Templars, so they didn't really get looked at too much. Their win percentage is 45%, which is just on the cusp of falling into that, like below 45, which is not what you want to see. Their XOX1 was sub 10%, so I mean, there is a bunch of people going to tournaments who are not having any results. You know, 1 in 10 people going to tournaments is going to go 4-0 or 5-0 or 4-1. Like, that's not what you want to see. That's a very poor result. Besides all that, they actually maintained a 3.8% rep, which is just about average. So despite their struggles, people are still bringing them. So, I mean, there's something to say to that. Kind of see it going in clumps. The top 5 were all grouped together. Then the next 4 or 5 were grouped together. Then the next like 6 are grouped together. So there's definitely tiers to where these armies are falling. And you can kind of go through and look at like the ones who are like doing okay, who's struggling. And you can kind of you can look at this and sort of see what army is doing the best overall and what army is struggling the most overall and where they kind of fall in the middle. So, you know, overall, it's been fairly balanced, but I think there is a little bit of love that could be used to those bottom armies, kind of bring everything back a little bit more even. All right, and here is the army tournament wins week by week. So this is for the whole data slate. So for 12 weeks, this shows the total army wins, and then breaks it down into colors for each week. Each week has its own different color, so you can kind of look at where each army made its big gains. So you look at Orks, for example, in the first couple weeks, they had a whole bunch of wins. Then they only had 1 apparently here and there, and they had a whole bunch of wins last week. So they did a lot of their work in 2 weeks. They had 6 wins 1 week, I think, and 4 wins last week. And then you look at Demons, they've been pretty consistently getting 3-4 wins each week. I mean, they were held off the sheets this week due to the nerfs to Legion of Excess. So I don't think we're going to see them up very high next data slate, but they had their fun in the sun for this one. And same as Space Marines, they started out really strong and they sort of petered off, and I don't think we'll be seeing them up at the top either. And then down the bottom, you have AdMech finally pulling out their first win. 10, and sisters down there with 0. But you have a majority of the armies falling within the 2 to 5 range. Now, the average wins, if you spread it across, would be 5. You have things like Custodes, Dark Angels, and Votan and Tau all sitting at 5. That's right about the average. You'd like to see this balanced a lot more than it is. This is pretty telling of what armies actually had the ability to take a win home and actually win a tournament, and what armies struggled to even get to the top tables, let alone win. So I think there's definitely some balance that needs to be done from the high-end side, and so I don't know what the tweaking needs to be, but there is definitely a great imbalance. Hopefully some of these changes will balance it out. I know it'll take a lot of wins from Demons and a lot of wins from Space Marines down, so maybe if that can be redistributed to especially like Sisters and everything, they might see a few more wins, but hopefully moving forward will be a little bit better. All right, and the first faction focus we're going to do for the week is Orks. So looking at their numbers for the last 4 or 5 weeks, everything's been pretty consistent, anywhere from high 4s to almost 7% army rep, which is not surprising. They're a very popular army. The win rate's anywhere from 46 to 56%, rate of range from the low to the high. So again, kind of what you want to see in the middle there is right around 50. So if you look at their army stats versus the meta, their win rate's 49.9, the average is 47.7, so it's above average. Army rep is pretty well above average at 5.1 to 3.7. XOX1 is pretty much bang on, and the tournament wins are well above average at 12 to 5.8. Looking at the subfaction player count, Tactical Brigade had 38% of the players, so they definitely had the most players. It was definitely the most popular detachment. It came in with Grotmas, so not surprising. It was the new shiny thing. And then Warhorde came up second with 30%, and everything else was under 10. And if you look at the win percentages, most armies fell right around the 45 to 55%. The new More Dakka detachment did come in this week with 60% win rate, but only had a few players for 1 week, so it's hard to really grab too much from that, but it definitely does look like a very strong detachment. Checking out the rankings out of all armies, they're in the top 10 of all rankings, not surprising. They had a pretty good data slate with really good numbers. And if you look at the bottom there, it has a chart with the subfaction tournament wins, so it's pretty split between 5 different detachments. Warhorde, Tactical Brigade, and Green Tide winning the most, but you still had More Dakka, who actually won a tournament this week, despite only being out for 1 week, and then Bully Boys, who won a tournament as well. Overall, I think Orks had a pretty good data slate. They were right where you want to be in win percentage and XOX1. They definitely did win a lot of tournaments, and they definitely had a higher army rep, which is not surprising. So I think with some of the changes made to Tactical Brigade, I think you'll probably see a few less tournament wins, depending on how powerful More Dakka ends up being for the next 12 weeks or so. So I think we're going to see kind of similar results moving forward. So, overall, not a bad place to be in. And next up, we have Tau. So Tau had also a pretty good data slate, but just kind of slightly worse than Orks. So Orks were slightly above average, Tau were just slightly below average, but still good. If you look at their army rep, it's anywhere from 3 to 5%. So again, that's right within the average. Win percentage anywhere from 40 to like 55%. So they had some weeks with a big swing, but mostly around 47, 48%. Which is right around the average. And if you look at their army stats versus the meta average, their win percentages like a 1.5 below average. Their army reps pretty much bang on. XOX1 is a little bit below, and the tournament wins are pretty much bang on. Looking at their subfaction player count there, the Retaliation Cadre had the most players at 27%. But they had 3 subfactions that had over 20%, and then you still had the Auxiliary Cadre at 19%. So Tau players had a lot of good options by the looks of it. They had 4 detachments at at least 20% representation, which is kind of unheard of. Most armies kind of skew towards 1 or 2 factions that are really good. It's nice to see that Tau have multiple options when making lists for tournaments. And then you look at the win percentages at the bottom. Their new win percentage, the Experimental Prototype Cadre, came in at 50% win rate for the week. Have to see how that shapes out going forward. It's only 1 week of data, but everything else is pretty much right where you want to be, anywhere from 40 to 57%. Funny enough, the 57% is the Crude Hunting Pack. Yeah, I think Tau had a pretty good data slate. If you look at their averages, they're right in the middle, anywhere from 12 to 20, which is like in that middle range of armies. Look at the subfaction tournament wins. It was actually spread across 4 different subfactions, and one of them actually being Crude, who won a tournament. All right, guys, that's it for the week. I just wanted to make a note that I did create a Patreon for anyone who's looking to help support the channel in other ways, and I have a link to that down below in the description. And don't forget to give the video a like to help push it out there, and don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. And with that, we'll head out for the week. Good luck in the tournaments this weekend, and I will see you guys in a couple weeks. Thanks. Bye.